Greetings, friends. Welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery coach, author of the book, A Life to Die For. This is episode number 170, Sovereignty, A Path to Happiness. In our current world, it seems as if there are external forces that determine how we are supposed to show up, behave, and interact with others. Essentially, we seem to be at the mercy of rules and regulations that are put in place to control us, as if without this external control, we would somehow contribute to endless chaos and anarchy. In order to maintain an orderly society, some of these rules and guidances may be necessary. But what is the cost? What happens to the spirit of individuals? We've been led to believe that we are making choices from a place of freedom, and yet a whole new world is opening in understanding just what freedom means to each individual. We are beginning to recognize the importance of individual sovereignty, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I've invited back a transition guide and energy worker to share some of her wisdom on this subject. As a light language channel and Gong sound journey facilitator, my guest assists clients to a transition from 3D to 5D consciousness. Using a combination of mentoring, intuition, light language channeling, and personal Gong sound journey tracks, she helps clients change outdated, negative thought and behavior patterns and guides them to create a life that truly flows. Please join me in welcoming the always delightful Maya Boston to today's show. Welcome, Maya. Come on camera so we can see your beautiful face.
Hello, David. How are you? Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, I'm great, and it's awesome to have you back again. I remember the last time we had a really fun conversation, and I'm sure it's going to be another one of the same. So first of all, I just want to thank you and honor you for filling in for me for a slot that came empty due to some external circumstances over which I had no control, and it was on short notice. And so I just want to, first of all, thank you and honor you for that, and let you know that it's great to have you back again.
Oh, thank you,
even
David.
though it didn't happen this week, it would have happened because I was definitely going to, you were on my list to call anyway. Now, I know that you are like halfway around the world over there in Australia. And if I'm not mistaken, it's quite late at night now. Is that right? Or early in the morning?
It's 1 a.m. in Western Australia.
Oh my God. Well, in that case, I just want to really honor you and thank you for being so dedicated to the work you do, that you're willing to stay up to really, from your perspective, it's probably not really pleasant to be up this late, but I really want to thank you for doing it. And I know that a lot of these programs are here in the United States, and so maybe you have to do a little bit of that juggling in order to speak to that audience. But I just want to say thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I just love being on your show, and well, whatever time that was going to be, I was going to be there with bells on.
Well, and you always do have bells, don't you? These gongs that you use, and we're going to talk about that as we progress. Now, first of all, I just want to, the topic that you chose to discuss is this thing about sovereignty, and I suspect that there was something that happened in your life, maybe when you were a kid or something, but something happened somewhere along the way that made this topic really important to you. Can you share a little bit about your journey and how you came to come to this idea of sovereignty and why it's so important to you?
Sure. Sovereignty is important to me because I grew up in a family where I was told I was only to be seen and not heard. And I grew up in a family that was emotionally manipulative. Emotional blackmail was used a lot of the time to keep us kids in line. And so going into my adulthood with holding a lot of fears inside of me and just living constantly with this knot in my stomach, started me on a journey of self-healing. And I eventually came to the topic of sovereignty. And specifically, my personal journey with sovereignty started with my biological family. So looking at how I can still speak my truth and not be triggered by the mechanisms that make my family function.
Right.
So, so in a nutshell, that's about it. That's yeah. My sovereignty was firstly from my biological family, and not being triggered continuously by and allowing myself to be triggered by the blackmail that was always used. It's just a continual part of the dysfunction in my biological family. So
Right.
yeah, living with that and not seeing it for what it is, each statement, each action, seeing them for what they are, and then being able to view them from a state of detachment. And although I see it and I feel what's going on, but I'm not in reaction to it. So this has led me to live this more balanced and happier life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful to hear. And there's a couple of key words that you brought up that I'm finding intriguing. First of all, emotional blackmail. Now I think that's the first time I've heard that term before. I've heard of manipulation, and I've heard of authoritarianism and controlling and all that kind of stuff. But blackmail, now that is a really, really descriptive and powerful term. And I'm going to start figuring out how I can use that in my own conversation now. But and it's really terrible that people use that kind of energy to control us, by using our emotions against us somehow.
Yeah.
That's really a terrible thing. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, it is. And learning to well, I'm very grateful. Let me just say that I'm very grateful to my biological family for teaching me this, and then for having the opportunity from through my own consciousness to ask what is more than this. There has to be more than this. There has to be a way of living life that is more in the flow and with the grace and the ease of being
Right.
in the flow of life, rather than continually living in this nervous, anxious state that I found myself in a lot of the time. So I guess my own consciousness, or pushed me beyond that to ask, what else is there? Can I find peace inside? And that was the beginning of my journey.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned now gratitude, being thankful for your biological family, and that's often the way it goes. Many of us go through challenging times, some of us extremely traumatic times in our lives, only to reach a point somewhere along the way where we understand that the reason we went through that maybe horrific experience was so that we could come to the understanding of the truth that we know now. That without that experience, we might not have gotten to that truth. That's a pretty interesting perspective and a fairly common experience for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And my personal belief is that if I had not gone through these experiences with my biological family, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. And I love who I am today, and therefore I'm grateful to them for having started me on this journey. I
Yeah.
was born into these circumstances, but
Mhm.
I, as an adult, I had a choice. I could stay with what I was brought up with, or I could grow beyond that and look for my own answers in the world.
Right. That's a beautiful thing too. I mean, so thank you for that as well. The thing I notice about this is that sometimes, and I've heard people say this, maybe you are the person you are, or you are the essence and the being and the energy that you are, and you chose on some spiritual level before you were even born to have a certain combination of experiences that would help you to experience the process of forgetting one thing and then remembering it. And the circumstances kind of came into being as a result of that decision to make that commitment. I've heard a lot of people talk about that kind of like these soul missions or something like that people talk about. Does that resonate for you?
Sure, yeah. I would call it a soul contract. So for me, that was my soul contract to come into this particular biological family, to have the particular experiences that I had in order to propel me on my journey through life. And you know, it's all in agreement with on a soul level long before any of us came in. So from an esoteric point of view, that is how I would explain my life circumstances.
Right. And so this concept of sovereignty then, now I have my own mental image of what sovereignty is, but what does it mean to you? What does sovereignty really mean? Maybe you can give us a little bit of a definition from your perspective so that we can understand the concept.
So for me, it means reaching a state of detachment. Detachment doesn't mean that I don't feel or see what is going on around me. I see it and I feel it, but I am not reacting to it. So there's a level of consciousness there where I can feel into the situation, and if I feel pressured, for example, I have a mechanism now where I can just say, well, let me just think about that for a little while and I'll get back to you. And so I sort of create a bit of space to help me have a better idea of what's going on and how to respond. So I'm not in reaction, meaning it's not that knee jerk reaction to a circumstance or to words that people are speaking. Sovereignty to me means I see it, I see the mechanisms, I see where the person will feel, because I'm an intuitive, I feel where the person is coming from, and then I can take a deep breath if I feel that I'm being triggered. Take a deep breath, and then respond from a more loving place. And you know, this is not. Well, for me, it's not an easy thing to do. I still find myself challenged from time to time, particularly with my biological family. It's a work in progress, and I feel that, you know, the more the life goes on for me, the better I'll be at it. But I'm always learning. I mean, and I'm always open to learning something new about myself.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like these are kind of the benefits of claiming your sovereignty that you've experienced. I think what I'm trying to get to is, you know, people talk about this notion of sovereignty in a general sense, and it's a difficult concept to explain to people because, first of all, we have the ego mind's perspective that we're all separate, and then we have the spiritual perspective that we're all one. And yet, at the same time, we have this notion of sovereignty, which in my mind implies that I am a sovereign being with the same rights as every other sovereign being. I have the right to, you know, to life, liberty, and whatever else, you know, all the natural rights that I'm born with. And nobody else has any authority over those rights. There is no official authority. There's only the authority that comes about as a result of me and we collectively giving up our sovereignty. That's how I think of it. And the issue that I believe is at hand here is that so many of us have given up our sovereignty in the world today, that we've allowed the world to turn into almost a totalitarian state where everybody is being controlled, right? And what it requires to reclaim sovereignty is just to simply stand in your power and to say, no, I am a human being, I am a sovereign being, and I have my rights. You can't take my rights away just because you have some other agenda. So unless I happen to agree with it. So that's where sovereignty kind of lands for me. And it kind of implies a degree of autonomy and independence, but at the same time, we are one with one another. We can't separate that truth. So it's kind of finding a way of balancing the two terms, I think. That's how I look at it.
Okay, but sovereignty begins with us inside. If we're continually in reaction to the world outside of us, then there's no sovereignty. Sovereignty begins inward. So if we're talking about an outside authority that is telling us what to do all the time, how I always flip that round and ask myself, how is that? What does that look like inside of me? What is the authority? Who is the authority inside of me that is telling me what to do? So it could be it could be my mother's voice inside of me that is still telling me, don't do that because you'll get hurt. Don't run. Don't. There was this continual string of don'ts, and just sit quietly and you'll be safe. And kids want to get outside and play and be free and spend a lot of time outdoors, particularly in my day. But where I was continually being told, don't run, you'll fall over, don't do that, you'll make your dress dirty, don't. It was just don't. So there was this continual dialogue in my head, which was the authority figure of my mother predominantly. Sure. And therefore sovereignty began inside for me, because once I could set that aside and see it for the fear-mongering that it was. And it's no slight on her. She did her best in parenting. I mean, none of our kids come with manuals that tell us how this little unit works. we have to, as parents, we navigate our way through parenthood the best that we can. And so she did the best that she could, as I did the best that I could with my child. So it's no slight on her parenting. It's simply, it was a way to grow up, yes, but then once I was an adult, establishing my sovereignty, which meant diluting that voice inside my head that continually said don't, and instilled fear inside of me. So for me, sovereignty began inside rather than a reaction to an outside authority. So when I reached a state of detachment from things that went on in my childhood, then I could look around myself at the outside world and see it for what it is as well, and go on to the things that you just talked about, David, which was infringements on our freedoms and etc. But my freedom began inside, to be free, to be finally who I truly am. That's rather right. than an authority figure from childhood telling me who I am.
No, that's you're
the
absolutely
sovereignty.
Right. I totally agree with you. And we're on the same page here. No question about it. And I agree. All of this work is an inside job. There's no way that you can expect someone out there to really solve your problems. You have to do the work yourself, and that means looking within. That means getting connected to your soul, and that means understanding the truth of who you really are. So, yeah, it's very, very, very powerful what you just said, and I just wanted to reiterate that. But so you got the don't kind of warning. That's your big trigger word, I'm assuming. If someone says don't for any reason now, that's what's going to trigger you into, wait a minute, I'm starting to have a reaction here, because you've been told all your life, don't do that.
Yeah, in early adulthood, I found myself doing the complete opposite. So somebody said don't, I would just go and do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing that really gets me is, first of all, I agree with you that I don't want to fault my parents. There's no point in faulting them, because I chose them. I chose them. I made some kind of, as you said, a soul contract before I was even born, and I knew I wanted to go through these experiences. So I probably made a deal with them beforehand, and we all kind of came into this world. We maybe forgot the details of what it was we were planning, but we knew we all had a mission, and we all had a part to play in fulfilling that mission. So my mom did what she did. My dad did what he did. I did what I did. We all followed our little roles to get to a place where I, and they too, but where I in particular could remember the truth of who I am. And that's really what my journey was about. So I think it's absolutely fabulous. You had all these don'ts because perhaps your contract was, I want to experience what it's like to reclaim my sovereignty. And maybe you didn't know the details, and your mom didn't know the details, but somehow you worked it out together, and that's what you ended up with. I think it's amazing.
It is. It's amazing how life works out.
That's right.
I'm always intrigued. I'm always fascinated by how things work out, and so many years ago now, I actually wrote to my mother when I started realizing a lot of these things, and I bought her a lovely greeting card, and I wrote straight from my heart, not in a negative way, but just really honoring her and being grateful to her for all the lessons that she taught me, for being the role model in my life, and all of that. So it was, I went and actually physically, wrote her something to let her know that I was okay. I was doing okay in life, and what that meant to her was something completely different as to what it meant to me. But the main thing was that I honored her, and that's what's important. I felt it was important in our relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful thing that you're describing, and something that we could all benefit from.
Sure.
And I would encourage everybody who's here live on the show, or who's watching the recording, consider taking the time to write a letter to your parents, whether they're alive or not. Write a letter to each one of them and tell them what they've meant to your life and how they have helped you to grow into the person that you are today. You don't have to send it necessarily. I mean, this is for you primarily, but maybe you will send it. Either way, write the letter. Having that on paper and being able to read it for yourself can be a great gift to your own heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually sent it. So she had it physically in her hand, and she read it, and whatever she drew from that, she thanked me for sending her the card, and whatever it meant for her, that was up to her. But for me, it was I want to say soul cleansing to be able to do that. Yeah.
Now, in my case, I mean, I had a lot of anger and I guess blame towards my mother for a long time, but it was mostly unconscious, and I didn't realize it until I started doing my personal growth work, which unfortunately happened after she died. So I wasn't able to speak to her, and but now I've come to a place where I can completely see her as a beautiful, loving woman who is doing everything she could possibly do to make my life better.
Yeah.
using the tools that she had at the time. And so it's really nice for me to be able to get to that place and know that I've completely forgiven her. Not that she ever needed forgiving. I needed to forgive her, not the other way around. I needed to release that so that I could be free. And that was all part of my process of reclaiming my sovereignty.
I was just going to say that's sovereignty right there. You know, when you
Exactly.
release yourself, when there's a level of forgiveness, and you're able to release yourself, and you're also releasing the other person as well at the same time, because there's
Right.
an energy that flows between two people who are, you know, continually thinking about each other, or one's thinking about the other, and it's, you know, negative thoughts or angry thoughts or whatever they may be, but you know, there's an energy flow between people when we think about them. So you know, when you think about somebody comes to your mind all of a sudden in the middle of your day, you know, and that for me is like, oh, they must be thinking about me, you know. And then I just send them some loving thoughts back.
That's nice. Yeah, that's nice. So now as we get back into the topic of sovereignty here, I know that you just recently contributed to a book by or for the Wellness Universe as part of the collaboration that I was in. Just go ahead and show that book on the screen so people can see it. Yeah, turn it. There we go. So this is called, go ahead and just read the title there to us.
So this is the Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care, 25 Tools for Happiness.
And yours is chapter
12.
Chapter 12, and it's a similar title to what we're talking about today, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So, and where can people get that book?
They can get it on Amazon. They can buy it on Amazon, and I think each of the authors is also selling their own signed copies. So if you want a signed copy from your favorite author, then you just contact them. Yeah.
Well, and it's a beautiful book, folks. I mean, I happen to be lucky to be one of the collaborators as well, and it's just a beautiful book. So I strongly recommend that you grab a copy, head over to the you can go to the Wellness Universe and find it there, or you can go to Amazon directly and just do a search for the Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care. Sarah just responded. She said, when my father was dying, I thanked him for being my dad and gave him permission to let go and go home. Beautiful. Gratitude can be very cleansing. That's true, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And by the way, Maya, just in case you didn't know, Sarah was actually on my show last week or 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about finding your voice, which is part of the same issue. You know, you started this thing with, I was told that children are supposed to be seen and not heard. Well, that was one of the topics that we covered. So it's amazing how all these things tie together.
Yeah, yeah. So I think a lot of us are stepping forward, you know, in life and on our journey to heal these aspects of ourselves, and we come from that. You know, we come from those backgrounds where we didn't have a voice as a child. These days, I can see a lot of changes in parenting, and children are given more of a voice. But certainly when I was a child, that was not the case in my biological family. And as life has gone on, I can see I was not the only one. So, yeah, it's it's just, you know, how maybe it was the style of parenting of the day. I'm not really sure, but it certainly is good to. It feels really good to be able to claim our sovereignty, claim our voices, so that we can finally speak and be the people that we were always meant to be.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Now, you've been talking, you kind of alluded to some of this earlier on around what the benefits of sovereignty were for you and how you were able to be less reactive. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Why does reclaiming your sovereignty allow you to be less reactive and more responsive?
Less reactive. Well, I think it was what we were role modeled. Well, certainly in my family, and looking around in my childhood at the people who were around me, my parents, friends, and extended family. It was what was role modeled. It was simply somebody says something, and it may have been intentionally offensive, it may not, but somebody else responds to it, and it's an immediate response. It's a reaction, voices are raised, tempers flare, and all of a sudden you have an argument. And as a child, as an intuitive, sensitive child, it was overwhelming. And to this day, I realize that I'm also quite sensitive to sound. So when people start raising their voices, it's not just the energy that I'm feeling, it's the sound that I'm hearing. And being, when you're child-sized and you've got big people around you yelling at each other, and doors being slammed, and harsh words being said to each other, that's really that's what was role modeled for me. So that was given to me as, this is how, as a human being, I need to operate in this world. And that that is really, as I got into adulthood, I realized that really did not serve me. So for me, it was important to step back, to be able to take a breath if I'm feeling myself triggered or pressured, and to be able to consciously respond, not from a knee-jerk reaction of anger or frustration or any of those feelings, but just, okay, this is what this person is feeling. They might be yelling at me. This is what's going on for them. I can see that they're irritated, frustrated, angry at something I've said or done. I'm taking a deep breath, and instead of contributing to the conversation and escalating it, I'm actually just bringing it to a more quiet center. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm sorry that you feel that way, or whatever the response is. It's an acknowledgement of the other person, what they're feeling, what I'm observing, and then coming back to my I statements. I felt, or perhaps I didn't express myself correctly, or I'm not making myself I didn't express myself in a way that I could be understood, and then going from that point. So I'm not contributing to the escalation of a conversation. So it was really important for me to just bring it back into just that center, groundedness. Okay, I can talk to you and we can have a conversation, even if we don't agree, but we can still converse about this topic at this voice level, rather than having the raised voices, for example.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And having come from a family where, shut up was a common phrase, I found, and not only that, but as you talk about voices, there were lots of loud voices in my family. And I found that in order to be heard, sometimes I had to raise my voice. It's become kind of a habit for me now, and so the other side of it is, you talk about the reactiveness that seems to stem from our ego minds, and from the not allowing our hearts to lead, and instead allowing our ego minds to do the leading, because our ego minds are fed by fear and are driven by fear, and the fear mostly of excuse me, of disappearing and not being seen, and just kind of fading off into the sunset as if you don't exist. That's the ultimate fear, I think, of the ego mind. And that, of course, boils down to a loss of love, which is really what we're all talking about here. The moment you realize that you are indeed a sovereign being, and that you are fully, expressed as a spiritual being of light and love, when you understand that, then the ego mind can just kind of take a lesser role in your life. And so reactivity tends to drop off and you become more responsive rather than reactive. The other thing that you said, which I think is very, very important, is this whole notion of, I statements, taking personal responsibility for it rather than saying you, just turn it around and say, well, when I saw this, my reaction was such and such. I had this judgment, I had this thought, I had this idea, and it's all made up in my head.
Yeah.
I own that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
once you do that, once you have the self-responsibility to do that, then you can start to have more compassion, more forgiveness, more gentleness.
Yeah.
That's been my experience anyway.
Absolutely. That kind of comes under my heading in my life as not taking things personally. So when someone is saying something, they're not actually meaning to direct it at me, but I'm able to come back and say, so if I understood you correctly, then when I heard you say I felt, or using those I statements, so I come back to me and what I have been experiencing as a result of our conversation, and I can say that at this level of voice, so that we're having a calm conversation, even though the other person might be feeling irritable. I could say, well, I feel that you're a little bit irritated around this, and I apologize if I have used words or done something to have made you feel this way, but it's always coming back to I feel, I've said, as you said, taking responsibility. So I'm expressing my experience of what the other person is communicating to me, or what whether through their words or through their actions. So
Right.
it had to be, for me, it had to be as an intuitive, as an empath, because I'm feeling what other people feel around me, as a child, to navigate my way in the world, and later as an adult, thinking that everybody is experiencing the world in the same way that I do, and then learning later that that's not the case, and then thinking there's something wrong with me because I'm experiencing the world in the way that I am.
Right.
And making my way through all of that and finding what my truth is, and not taking on other people's truths. So it was really a journey with a few challenges right from the beginning, because what my sensory input is not the same as somebody else's. And I can, to this day, still talk to biological family members, and I feel like I'm talking a foreign language, because what I am saying is not being understood by what they say, or what their sensory experience of my communication is. So
Right.
there's a disconnect, and so it's like, okay, I need to put this in a different way so that they can understand it. So I really make an effort to refine and come back to where they're at, and put it to them on terms that they can understand. And then it's entirely their choice as to whether they want to receive that information from me, or just, as you said, playing into the ego out of fear instead of love. And for me, the whole journey is about finding that balance between ego and our spiritual self,
Right.
because to me, the ego isn't to be squashed or suppressed in any way. It's what gives us our individuality, but it's not to, we've been taught to live a life where ego is just taking over our whole life. Whereas now my understanding is more about balance, and that ego needs to be balanced with the spiritual self in
Exactly.
order to find that center of stillness within, and then come from that center of stillness and be able to communicate and express who we truly are.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Lot of good points that you brought up here. And one of the things that I'd like to say is, while it's important for me, for us, each individual, to take responsibility for his or her own actions, regardless of, not just actions, but all your thoughts, words, and emotions as well. That's my responsibility. I cannot, however, require you to take responsibility. Although if you do take responsibility for your own stuff, that'll make our interactions a lot better. That will improve our interactions. If you refuse to take responsibility, if you want to continue to point the finger at me as if I'm somehow the one that caused you to feel a certain way or whatever, if you want to keep doing that, our relationship's not going to last. I can promise you. I will eventually reach a point where, I'm sorry, I can't take that stuff anymore. I'm going to move on now. I have already moved on in one sense, because I have chosen to take responsibility of my own life. I am trying to grow and expand and evolve. And if you're not willing to do that in relationship with me, well, that's your choice. I mean, you're free to make that choice. And as a sovereign being, I honor that choice. But that doesn't mean I have to stick around and deal with the consequences.
And I agree with you, and that is for me a little bit easier to do with friends and acquaintances. But when it comes to biological family, that really posed a challenge for me, which, again, which required further work on my part in order to get past the reaction that my biological family had towards me for even stepping away in the way that I did into my sovereignty. I wasn't towing the family line, or whatever their thought process was around that. But completely agree with you, because once we've claimed that our inner sovereignty, then that ripples out to all the other relationships in our lives. And I'm very fortunate to have found a partner in my life who is now my husband, and we've been together for over a decade, who has also taken responsibility for his life, and we have this wonderful relationship, which I have not had previously in my life. I really struggled with personal relationships, but I've found a relationship where we're both taking responsibility, and we both, if there's something that's come up, the other one will say, "Well, what's going on for you?" And then, and then the I statements start coming in, and it's always a calm voice, and I'm just really blessed. For me, that indicates to me the level of inner work that I've done for myself, because once I've done it inward, then that for me ripples outward, and I've been able to draw in a partner like that. So I'm very grateful for this amazing journey of healing, inward healing, that I have been able to do. And it doesn't end there, of course, because it's a never-ending journey.
No, that's beautiful. And that's a key word, healing. I mean, what healing means to me anyway, it really means returning to wholeness.
Yes.
There's some part of me that is wounded or damaged or maybe broken that needs to be repaired. And the only person who can do that work to repair it is me. I can't, sure, I can go and maybe get some help with a doctor or a therapist or, a Gong specialist. I can seek out the kind of help that will maybe facilitate my healing, but ultimately the healing is up to me. And that's really important for people to understand.
Yes, yes, taking responsibility for our own healing. And healing for me is a return to balance, a
Correct.
return to balance. So there's a state of balance within. I don't feel broken or damaged. My word is balance. So there's a return to balance. I started thinking about that word balance long ago when I learned that the the Hopi word for, I think it's the Hopi word for healing is beauty. So we're returning back to the beauty that we have always been. So that's when I started looking at it as, okay, so it's an imbalance and then a return to balance, a return to beauty.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that, beauty. Yeah. So the opposite of beauty, at least in terms of our, the way dictionaries work, is ugliness, which implies a lack of balance or a lack of healing.
Mm.
Although I've always thought that ugly was more like the Scottish word meaning rugged, unrefined,
Oh.
the ugly mountains or something like that. Ugly can be quite a beautiful word when it's used in that context.
Well, for me, yeah, I guess each, to our own perspective. Beauty for me, and then the opposite would be imbalance. So I
Right,
don't
right.
think of ugly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've actually embraced the word ugly, and I've never shared this on this show, I don't think, but I'm sure most people have actually looked up the meanings of the names that they have. So I looked up the meaning of all my names, David Douglas MacLeod, which is my entire name. And David, of course, means beloved. Douglas means dark water. And MacLeod, believe it or not, means son of ugly.
Oh, that's
So
interesting.
I took that and I said, how can I play with this? So I've now taken on one of my spiritual names is beloved son of ugly of the dark water. So that's one of my spiritual names. And the reason I love that is because the dark water is the place where I go to do a lot of my healing. It's the shadow place. It's the place where I look into those dark places in order to bring light to it. So I like it. It's my
Yeah. The mystery.
yeah. Anyway, we're off topic here a little bit, but that's okay. This is fun, just bouncing around and having a great
Yeah.
conversation about what it really means to be a sovereign being. And so you've talked a lot about this return to balance and being able to. I mean, once you're in balance, then reactivity doesn't really seem to be a problem, because reactivity now can be balanced with response. I can maybe feel myself reacting, and I can slip back over and say, okay, how can I regain control of that reaction so that I can respond from a place of love rather than from a place of fear. That's really a
Yes.
beautiful process.
Yeah, because we don't ever really in the process of this balance, we don't ever really suppress the emotions, because the emotions are part of being human. It's simply getting to know oneself better, so that my learning is that around a certain family member, when they begin certain sentences with certain words, that I notice myself immediately and where I'm at. I can take that deep breath, center, and then I can come from that place of love, instead of that immediate knee-jerk reaction and going into, you're accusing me, you're this, and pointing the finger
Right.
back, which
Yeah.
serves nobody. So we
Correct.
as humans, we don't, in that place of sovereignty, the emotions are not suppressed, they're simply noticed. I notice my emotional reaction, my body is telling me something, I'm tuning in, okay, that this is how I'm feeling in this moment, and I can then come from that place of love in response, rather than as we've always been, well, as I was always taught to do in my family, because that's what we did at each other, you know.
Uh-huh. I like that.
Yeah. So,
You're not wearing
like,
the appropriate costume for that though right now.
no.
Yeah. So this whole idea of sovereignty as the natural state, and I talk about this in that book, by the way. I talked about joy being our natural state, and you talk about sovereignty, which is a path to joy being the natural state. And I think it's a really interesting that we have a slightly different perspective, but basically coming to the same conclusion. So talk a little bit more about that. Why is it a natural state, and how did we get separated from it?
Well, we were born with it. It's our natural state as when we're born. But as we get to know our families, as we're observing what's going on around ourselves as children, as babies, as we're listening, we're like little sponges, aren't we? We're just absorbing what's going on, and
Right.
we're being role modeled all of these ways of being, and then we just adopt them as our own in our childhood, and we take them into adulthood. And as I said, we have a choice. Does it serve us is the big question. Does it serve me to feel this way each and every day? Or does it serve me to say this in this way? You know, there's always this question, how is this serving me? And I just want to kind of also bring back this natural state of being. I have this lovely analogy for you from a dear friend of mine who passed last year. I saw her in late 2019, and I knew it would be the last time that I would see her. She passed from cancer. She was a kahuna in Hawaii, and she gave me this wonderful gift of this image that when we're born with this beautiful bowl of light, and it's just our natural state of being. And then as we begin to grow and observe things around us, we collect these pebbles and they're put into our bowl, and eventually our bowl,
the light out. Yep.
the pebbles block out the light, but the bowl is heavy too. So
That's right.
my process, my inner my personal journey, my inner growth and expansion of consciousness is that process of taking those pebbles back out so that I can go back to being in my natural state of being. So I just wanted to put
That's
that
beautiful.
out there.
Yeah. No,
It's a traditional, it's in her culture, the traditional image of, you know, what we are when we're born, and then how we get to that place of not being who we truly are. And it's everybody's journey to, you know, take out as many pebbles as they like or not, you know, to keep all the pebbles. That's entirely up to each individual.
Yeah, well, you know, pebbles, that's a great analogy, by the way. I really like it. I have a slightly different analogy, but it's an analogy, you know, where
Sure.
we learn things in the early stages of our life where mom or dad or whoever, grandpa, whatever, somebody in our inner circle, the people who are supposed to be taking care of us, say something like, that's not okay, or don't do that, or whatever the phrase is. And we internalize that as, oh, this part of myself is not acceptable. And so what we do is we take that little part and we kind of cut it off. As we just imagine yourself as a complete circle. You just cut out a piece of pie and you toss it in this bag that you're hanging around your shoulder and you carry it around with you.
Yeah.
The fact is that part of you never actually goes away. It's just temporarily hidden. And even the hiding is not real because it always shows up when you least expect it to. It always comes out at the most inopportune and least desirable moments. And the thing is, if you ignore those parts, they will act out in negative ways. And so this is my work, you know, the dark water, the shadow work is about taking that bag, pulling those pieces out and looking at them and saying, what is it that I was really trying to hide here? And is it still worth hiding? Well, maybe you don't want to always show the arrogant part of yourself. But let's be truthful. Arrogance is an awareness that you actually are smart and that sometimes you do have the right answer. So sometimes you do want to bring it out. You don't always want to, you don't want to show up as the know-it-all necessarily. But when you have an answer that you know is right, you have a responsibility to share it. And you can do it from a place of humility without trying to overpower somebody else. In other words, you can be just as bright as you want to be, and so can everybody else. You don't have to worry about them, being overshadowed by your light. That's not your responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely agree, David. That's a really lovely analogy with the pile. I'll remember that one as well.
Well, I can't take credit for it. I mean, I thought about it in some way, but it was actually Robert Bly who wrote a book, and he talked about a little book on the human shadow or something like that. I think it was called. Very, very good little book, and that was his image. He talked about us being a 360-degree being, and we cut away parts of ourselves. But it's effective because it describes what I think is actually a process that we all go through. So,
yes.
Yeah. But now I want to ask you a little bit about your Gong work. You talked about these Gong sound journeys. Tell us a little bit about what that is and how it helps people to regain their sovereignty.
So, the way I play gong and do sound therapy in a different way to most people. There's a way that I interact with the sound with my energy and with the intentions that I set before I begin the sound journey, so that there's a different result, and also the knowledge and my intuitive knowledge that comes through as a result of past lives, because I have past life recall. And that I bring all that knowledge and wisdom into my gong playing, so that my sound therapy is very different to a lot of other stuff that I've heard, and I've had a lot of feedback from people over the years, as I've been doing Gong Sound Journey for 15 years now, and people who say the difference between just sitting and listening to the sound to when they come to my sessions and they actually feel the sound, they actually feel something. So the way that the gongs for me work is that I'm setting intention, and it's a very conscious thought and process as I'm playing as well. And I'm actually doing a lot of energy work at the same time as I'm playing. So it can, and we know the benefits of sound therapy. That it's very calming. It's you can release stress. It physically, it can lower blood pressure. There's all this calming and soothing effect. But when the vibrations of the gongs are actually passing through you, then they may come up against a blockage, some resistance is probably a better word, inside of us. And I've had clients that have said to me that sometimes they feel a bit of discomfort in an area in their body. And I said, well, that would be where the physical vibration of the gongs is actually coming up a resistance, and it can't pass through. I mean, you've got to remember, we're more than 80% water. Water's a great conductor of sound. So usually sound passes through water quite easily. But when it meets up with a resistance, then of course there's some discomfort in the body. So really, what is that? Feel into it. What does it mean for you? What is it that you feel you're holding in that particular part of your body? All of that is part of my work and how I help people come to places of sovereignty in areas of their life. And that is just one of the tools that I use in my mentoring program, where I actually take 22 days holding your hand through a process to get you to a place of sovereignty that we've discussed, and the client has decided that that is the area they wish to work on. I actually create a personal 15-minute Gong track specifically for the client, with all the intentions of what had been discussed in the personal sessions during the mentoring period. So it helps calm, it helps center, and it helps. And when we're calm and centered, we also get to see things a lot clearer inside of us. We don't have all that mental chatter going on, clouding our view, all the criticisms and judgments and things coming in. There's just a calmness, there's peace inside, and we can clearly see where things are coming from inside of us during these Gong sound journeys. So you notice I'm not saying that it's a healing. I'm not using any of those words. It takes you on a journey,
Right.
of an inner journey to have a look at what is actually going on for you.
Beautiful. Yeah, that sounds really fabulous. I remember it's got to be 10 or 12 years, though longer than that, like 2005, I guess, or maybe 2004. I had an opportunity to sit in a sound therapy session where the practitioner went through all kinds of different modalities. But the one that I remember the most was where she had one of these big crystal, what do you call them? Crystal bowl.
Yeah.
And she had me sit down in a chair and with my legs just wide enough apart that the bowl could fit between my legs. And she actually had the bowl underneath the chair. And somehow she was playing that bowl while I was sitting on this chair. And of course, initially, I just hear the sound. But after a while, the sound, obviously the volume is the same volume 100% of the time. But to me, it felt like it was so loud, it was completely surrounding me. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger. I was like immersed in this swirling, beautiful sound. And it really did feel amazing. So,
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is I know how powerful sound therapy can be from my own personal experience. And now you as a practitioner, and you're offering this as something that people can do even remotely, which I think is amazing. And I know you have a link to a journey that you want to share with people. Can you just drop that in the chat, and then I will make sure to copy it into the recording. So there you go, folks. It's www.mayagongs.com/sign-up-for-free-gift.html, but that's sign up for free gift with hyphens between all the words. So yeah, you can remember that and just go to that website, grab a copy of that. What's that, about a 15-minute journey? Is that right?
It's a 13-minute Gong soundtrack, yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. Wow. Well, we've had such an amazing conversation today, Maya. I'm thrilled that you've been here. It's been just totally awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to say to people before I close this out?
Just wanted to thank you, David, for having me back on your show. I just love these conversations with you. They just, as you said, they kind of bounce around a bit, but it's all in the flow. I'm really feeling the flow of this, and that we really covered a lot of information, and I believe the information is useful out there to people. So whoever's watching this afterwards or is with us now, I'm sure that you've found something interesting in all of that. So thank you to all of you who have been here with us and have asked the questions and have shared. And thank you again, David, for having me on your show. Loved it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, my honor. Thank you for being here. And thank you all for either being live on the show or watching the recording. I just want to remind people that recordings of this show and every other show are on my website at lifemasterytv.com. That's life-mastery-tv.com. Yeah, some of us have to use hyphens, you know. I truly hope you enjoyed this presentation. My friends, you're in a few hours, you're going to receive an email from the Learn It Live platform asking you if you'd like to submit a review. And I would really appreciate it if you could take the time to respond to that. Give us a review, preferably a 5-star review, but whatever's true in your heart, because those help us to spread the word and get more people to come and listen in to these episodes. Oh yeah, and don't forget a copy of our book, the self-care book from the Wellness Universe. It's available on Amazon. Grab a copy because it's well worth it. So finally, I'd like to just remind everybody to practice the life mastery mantra every day. It goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So until we meet again, I just want to thank you for being here. I am David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. Bye-bye for now.